Hello tipsters and tricksters, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. Seeing as my last Emily in Paris reaction video was one of the most popular on my channel and the new season has just dropped, I figured I better get on with reacting to season 2. So let's have a chat about whether or not the show has made any improvements. If you watched my last video, you'll know that I hated the show. And I had some big problems with it, as many people did. I know Lily Collins mentioned in a few interviews that she and her team implemented some changes in the new season that reflected some of the criticism that they got. So I'm intrigued to see whether or not they fixed some of the faux pas that they made and whether or not the show is any better. Is it any better to watch? Is the writing any better? Does Emily grow as a person? Does she behave better? Let's find out. So without further ado, let's get into it.
What have you got if you haven't got love?
So if you are new to my channel, I better introduce myself. My name is B. I'm a vintage glamour enthusiast and musician. I make vintage beauty and style videos with a little bit of sustainability, veganism, and lifestyle thrown in for good measure. So if that sounds like your jam, don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when my videos come out. So I will get to my overall reaction to season 2 of Emily in Paris at the end of the video, but I will say straight off the bat that I did not hate watch season 2. I was expecting to hate watch it, but I actually legitimately enjoyed watching some elements of the show. I had a giggle at some points, I could relate to some things, so that was already a pretty major improvement compared to season 1. So let's first off have a look at whether or not Emily in Paris made any improvements on the criticisms that it received in season 1. One of the things that I did notice about this season is that there seemed to be a more diverse array of characters in terms of ethnicities and cultures. We're introduced to some new characters who aren't all just either white American or white French. That was one of the major criticisms of the first season, is that it was just a lot of white people, and anyone who's visited Paris knows that it's a very multicultural city and it's just not really realistic for Emily to be wandering around in a city just full of white people. We see characters from different countries, we see LGBTQI characters, there is some drag representation in there.
Let them eat cake.
I think there is a decent mix. I mean, it's one of those things where the show is probably going to be accused of just doing these things because they get criticized, but at the same time, like, what else are they supposed to do? Like, yeah, they should have done better in season 1, but at the same time, I personally think it's good that they're making an effort in season 2. So, you know, I think they're going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't, but I was pleased to see a more diverse cast and some diverse storylines. The second major thing that I noticed with season 2 was people speaking French. There was a lot more French dialogue with subtitles so that we actually got the feeling like we're in France.
Très doué pour attirer l'attention, mais il lui manque la subtilité nécessaire pour évoluer dans ce milieu.
Alors dites-lui subtilement d'arrêter, avant qu'elle ne ruine définitivement la réputation de cadeau.
And also that around Emily, people have stopped just accommodating her all the time and speaking English. They're obviously more comfortable chatting with her in English and they don't pick on her so much in this season. But when French people are talking to each other, they switch to French and Emily just has to suck it up. I appreciated that because that is a real expat experience, and something that I mentioned in my previous video is you just get thrown in the deep end and that's what forces you to learn French. I am a little surprised in this season that Emily is still unable to speak French. She very rarely says anything in French apart from the occasional bonjour. She still walks into the office and says hello to her colleagues or good morning, and I'm just like, why?
Good morning. I was thinking of...
She's supposed to have been in the country for at least 6 months at this point, if not longer. She's working all day, every day in an office where people speak French. Yes, they speak English with her, but she would be surrounded by the French language all the time, so it's weird to me that she's not picking anything up at all. I get the storyline, like it's supposed to be silly and like she's supposed to have that kind of like ditzy American thing going on, you know, she's not doing well in her French classes and stuff, but I just think for someone that's like such a hard worker, go-getter, and even she's surprised when she doesn't go up to like level 2 in French. But I don't understand how she can be surprised when she makes literally no effort to speak French. So how does she expect to have learned the language? So that was a little bit frustrating, but I did appreciate that the show in general has included more French so that you really get a feel for the French language, which is beautiful. And I think most people that move over to France, apparently not Emily, but most people want to learn the French language. So I think that was a big improvement. I was also really pleased to see that the romantic storylines were a little bit less cliched. Emily kind of fell into romantic situations in a little bit more of a realistic fashion, and it's not just every Frenchman fawning over her like it was in season 1. Like, it was just silly. It was like every single place that she went, she was either being sexually harassed or men were, you know, asking her if she wanted to sleep with them. I know some people in the comment section have said like it's from Emily's point of view. Okay, fair enough. But even so, like, we still have to actually be able to watch and enjoy the show and not have it be completely ridiculous. And so I feel like there was a bit of a better balance this season with reality, so that when they kind of did these moments of farce and just ridiculousness, it was fun rather than just the whole time you're just thinking, this is like, when you're watching television and movies, you have to suture people in, making people kind of believe that they're in this world and forget the real world around them, right? And in order to get away with things that are really ridiculous and wouldn't happen in real life, you need to ask your audience to suspend disbelief, okay? If you haven't sutured the audience in well enough to be involved in this world, then it's very difficult to get them to just kind of let go of reality and accept silly kind of unrealistic situations that you often get in film and cinema. But you have to set it up in the right way. And season 1, for me, they did a really terrible job of this. I mean, it was just really, really bad writing. Season 2, I mean, it's still a pretty crappy show, guys. Like, it's not a well-written show. It's not particularly well produced. Like, there's a lot of money behind it, but it's not good quality. But season 2 has done a better job, in my opinion. And there was plenty of very silly moments that wouldn't happen in real life, but that I actually genuinely laughed at. And I watched it twice because the first time I was watching it and doing other things, I didn't always pay so much attention. But the things that made me laugh both times watching the show. So, you know, that I will give it that. I will give it some credit that I think the writing has improved and the moments of comedy were done better because we were actually able to believe a bit of what was happening to Emily because it was more realistic. I think some of the aspects of what it's like to be an expat were a bit more obvious in the show as well. Not only did Emily grow as a person, the experience of being an expat is a very confronting one. You're just thrown in the deep end where even doing the most basic things in your everyday life, like shopping, are new and different, and you're kind of having to learn everything from scratch. And so you're on a very steep learning curve when you come to a new country. And I think something that frustrated me personally in season 1 was that Emily just didn't seem to grow as a person. She came to France with this attitude of like, America is right, I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to teach these French people a lesson. And okay, that initially she might have had that point of view, but I think as an expat, that attitude wouldn't last very long because the reality is it just doesn't work that way. Like, you're in their country, you're going to have to do things their way and learn the ropes, especially with the team that she had. Like, they were really hard on her, and so I just found it really unrealistic that Emily basically did not grow or evolve as a person at all in season 1. So in season 2 she does. She's kind of coming to her terms with the fact that she's struggling with the French language. She is starting to see things from the perspective of her French workmates and enjoying the French lifestyle, even though she struggles a bit with the concept of like not working on weekends or work parties not really being places where you speak about business, etc. She is slowly starting to enjoy some elements of the French lifestyle and culture that are not akin to the American equivalent, and that's a kind of nice element of the show because as an expat I very much experienced that, and I think you don't really notice that you've done that so much in yourself until you're confronted with your home culture again. And so when Emily is dealing with work colleagues from the US and she's kind of reminded of US work culture and attitudes, there's this like juxtaposition between the French and the American work-life balance and attitudes towards relationships with clientele and stuff like that. So I found that quite interesting, and I think that was balanced quite well. I mean, it's not going to be the same in every workplace, of course, but I think they did deal with that nicely. And there was this constant running joke of like, it's illegal to work on weekends.
You know, we are not allowed to answer work calls on weekends.
At savoir?
No, in France.
That's absurd.
That's the law.
You might not know this, but in France, they did actually pass a law where you're not allowed to email the staff or contact them out of work hours. Of course, there are plenty of people who work overtime and work weekends and, like that's not kind of a blanket thing. And I'm sure workplace to workplace, it's different, but it was done in a comical way and it wasn't incorrect. And it did kind of show the difference between Emily's work ethic and that very American working all the time, striving for the promotion attitude compared to the French work-life balance, which was something I personally really loved about France. And you see Emily start to learn this and enjoy this, and the French people around her are trying to actually educate her and call her out, but in a nice way. This was a major factor that I noticed in this season. Her French friends and colleagues actually trying to help her integrate and explain things to her. There's even a moment in the show where Emily is talking to Gabriel and saying, I think it's a Star Trek quote where she says like she breached the primary objective or whatever the quote is. I'll put it up on the screen. I'm not a Trekkie.
The Prime Directive prohibits any members of the Starfleet from interfering with the lives of alien civilizations.
But in this case, you're the alien.
Gabriel points out to her that actually in this instance, she is the alien. So there is more acknowledgement this season that it's Emily who needs to integrate and change, and that she can't just stomp in there with her Americanness and teach the entire French country a lesson about how America is better than France. They're the kind of conversations that you have all the time when you're integrating into a new country and you've made friends and those friends realize that there's cultural differences and they try and help you. I thought that was quite endearing. It allowed us to get to know Emily and the other characters better, and I felt that it was quite a nice way to drive the storyline forward throughout this season, and it really was a big part of it as well. Some of the things I wasn't such a big fan of, like we've got the love triangle thing happening. For a little while, it did seem like the focus, so I'm here patting Samwise, who is being so freaking cute. I'm cat sitting at the moment, that's why. The sort of menage a trois storyline sort of seems interesting initially because you think that the story is going to go towards the friendship between the two girls, but then it does kind of turn into a classic like rivalry of two girls fighting over a guy thing, and the guy kind of being all sappy and sad and just like, even though he's being a massive dick and he can't, like, why? This guy can't be alone. Like, he can't be single. If he's not having one girl, he's having the other. And he doesn't seem to really mind that much which one he has. I mean, I think we're supposed to be rooting for him and Emily, but, like, this is a really toxic relationship. And it's such a shame when Camille and Emily are a good friendship and there's so many healthy aspects to their friendship. And Camille is one of the main people who actually tries to help Emily integrate into French culture and really makes an effort to introduce her, takes her to Champagne, introduces her to her family, takes her out places. It just seems such a shame to just go down the same old boring storyline. I mean, in some ways, they're kind of treading the line with that, where they're keeping most of the focus on Camille and Emily, as opposed to it being about Emily and Gabriel. He's of course in the show, but Camille is definitely a much bigger and more important character. I think the way that she's written is more well-rounded and she seems to get a lot of airtime. So I do appreciate that, but I just think it's just a shame when we're coming from the creators of Sex and the City, who had like such a forward-thinking show that put women at the center of the storyline, who gave them so much agency and talked about topics that had previously been quite taboo on TV, to kind of have these really like cliched tropes in the show is a little bit boring, especially when it's a cliche of like a menage a trois in France and people having affairs. Like they've moved away from this idea that everybody is constantly sleeping with each other and they're totally okay with it, which was a big problem in season 1. This is just more of a classic, even American style love triangle, but that's more just a general like crappy TV show perspective than it is a critique specifically of this show and the fact that it's set in France, but we shall see where that goes. I do think they balanced up the silliness of the characters a bit better so that it didn't just seem like the show was mocking France. It kind of mocks both the French and the American characters, which a lot of people defended the first season in the comment section of my last video, saying, both cultures were mocked, but I don't think it was balanced in the previous season, and I think this time round it is balanced. And I also felt, having watched quite a lot of French TV shows, I feel like they really brought in some of the conversational aspects, the writing aspects, and this element came into the show a bit more, and I did recognize some of the way that France goes about making TV shows coming out in Emily in Paris. So there was this really nice like pairing of the two production styles. That was a little bit more nuanced. That might not be something that lots of people notice unless they have watched some French TV shows, which I will list a few of them here on the screen, that kind of remind me of the style, particularly when the French characters are speaking to each other and we've got their individual little storylines. Which was also very nice this season, is that it wasn't just all about Emily. The characters around her weren't just kind of these cardboard cutout, you know, one-dimensional characters that are just there for Emily to have a reaction to or to serve some sort of purpose in her personal storyline. They now are being developed as characters and have their own storylines, and I think that some of those storylines are honestly far more interesting than Emily's storyline, to be honest. But it does make the show more interesting, and obviously it's easier to be invested if there's a variety of characters. It also gives Emily a much better opportunity to explore her character when she has real people to interact with. I mean, this is not to say that I loved the show, but season 1 just really annoyed me. I just thought it was absolutely, I thought it was a piece of shit, to be honest. It was just a terrible, terrible show. I was shocked that it won all of those awards, and that I honestly think it did so well because people hated it, not because people loved it. But honestly, season 2, they have made a decent effort to improve upon a lot of the just lazy, ignorant approaches they took to this show. So there's that at least. And as I say, as an expat, I think the story arc that Emily goes on, the struggle with learning French, I definitely struggled learning French myself. I was in a job where I had to speak English all day. I had to pretend I didn't know how to speak any French at all because I was working with small children who were learning English by immersion. And the idea behind the ethos of my workplace was that if the children know you speak French, they'll keep switching back to French, whereas if they think you cannot understand them, then they're forced to speak English. So it was very hard for me to learn any French because I wasn't hearing it. And then what I did learn, I couldn't then practice and speak myself. I had to speak English. And so my progress with my French was very slow, and it is very frustrating, and you do feel very isolated. And so I can understand kind of Emily's viewpoint from that perspective. I did really enjoy, once again, Emily's fashion. I just really like how unique it is. I think it really does represent Emily's personality very well, and it really makes her stand out amongst her French colleagues and friends. I know some of the comments that I received on the first video, quite a lot of them that came out in defense of Emily in Paris, were sort of saying, you know, that it was lighthearted, that it was poking fun, you know, that it wasn't something to take seriously. I guess the thing is that for me, I'm coming from the perspective of someone who studied film and culture, and the way that film and television not only reflects our culture, but also impacts upon it. And, you know, a lot of people, the reason they come across videos exactly like this one is that they are looking up things like, is Emily in Paris realistic? Because people want to have an expat experience in Paris, and they look to shows like this as providing information and advice, and they want to know if it's a realistic experience. And I do think that a show like this, especially one that is so widely received, it's going to have a massive impact, and it does have a responsibility to, even if it's not 100% correct, and even if that it's supposed to be lighthearted romantic comedy and just a bit of silly fun, it doesn't have to put negative information out there. It doesn't have to say negative things about France. It doesn't have to be ignorant. It doesn't have to be tone deaf. And so I do think that there is a responsibility on the part of the producers in that sense, especially when you're talking about the caliber that they're at. They're very experienced. They're not green. They're not green in terms of their age. They're not green in life in general, and they're not green in the industry. And so I think, you know, we can hold them accountable in that sense, especially when, you know, it's being promoted as, you know, being by the producer of Sex and the City, which I know didn't age that well, but at the time was a very cutting edge show. And so we have high expectations for Emily in Paris in that sense. Does it meet the expectations this season? No, I still think it falls very far short of those expectations, but I do think it has improved, and it may improve again. Would I watch season 3? Yes, I would shame watch it. Like, obviously, I'm admitting to you guys on the internet that I would watch it. Would I watch it because I think it's a good show? No. Do I watch it because it's trashy entertainment? Yes. I would love to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of the video and any suggestions for future videos. If you're interested in my French content, you can check out the playlist that I will list up above of all my French adventures. There will be more to come because I am planning to move back to France, so hopefully you guys will come along for the ride with me. If you are interested in more content as well, I do have a Patreon. You can check out the link down below. There are regular catch-ups. We do Zoom meetups. There is a music tier if you're interested in my music. I also do more vlogs and behind the scenes stuff over there as well as like vintage tips and tricks specific videos. Lots of stuff to check out. So yeah, that's linked down below. Come and follow me on my Instagram. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye.